Everett, are you going to do your memory verse? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do well. Very good. Yeah. Tell everybody bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good morning, everybody. This is What Does the Bible Say? This is our school edition of What Does the Bible Say? And it's Tuesday instead of Wednesday, and that's because we have some doctor's appointments that we have to do tomorrow. So I wanted to get this information out there instead of missing a day of class. So we're doing the book of Daniel, and I am treating the book of Daniel exactly like I did the book of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And so when we have these Bible classes, this is what I've been saying. If I taught these classes just when I was getting, like I said, okay, next week we're going to Daniel. And if I taught these classes basically the way that you just expected them to be taught, then we wouldn't be getting anything. And that is the problem with most Bible classes across America, is they're just going through and they're getting the same old. And I'm not promoting this idea of where we always have to come up with some off-the-wall, novel ideas that no one has ever considered, and then we start promoting it because it's new and it's cool. But I am always talking about application. And so this is what I have been saying is, if you hear, like someone says, the book of Daniel, and then you just start thinking, oh, the book of Revelation, then I do believe that you are wasting the book of Daniel. And the way that I said it last week was, people don't even read the first 6 chapters of the book. They read chapter 7, they skip over 8, they only read the last half of chapter 9, they skip 10 and 11, and then they pick up chapter 12, which is only a handful of verses, it's not long at all. So yeah, I think the way that people are studying the book of Daniel has not been good. And I think the way that a lot of people have been teaching Daniel is not very good. The book of Daniel is not just this premillennial textbook. And I don't even think it's an end times textbook. It's not any different than Jeremiah and Ezekiel in that they were Old Testament prophets to an Old Testament audience. And you say, well, if you keep emphasizing that Old Testament idea, how does it mean anything to us? Same way that the New Testament means something to you. You're not a first century Jew, but you read the New Testament and understand that somehow you're forming pieces of application. Now, As we get going, of course, I always say our contact, 276-806-3641. That's my personal number. CalebGRobertson@gmail.com. If you email me, we'll get you on the Informer list, which is a page-and-a-half Bible article that comes out every Sunday morning. And the one that we had this past Sunday was, "The devil told us that evangelism doesn't work." And my thing on that, and I would say anyone who reads it and watches the broadcast knows that I was still responding to Don Blackwell. Don Blackwell at some congregation told people that door knocking and tent meetings don't work anymore. And, that's the same manner of thinking. Like you just say, well, it don't work no more. That's what people say about controversy. We read the New Testament text, and it's a massively controversial text. And folks say, oh, well, it worked. Hold on. People say it worked back then. It wouldn't work now. See, what's the difference in that? See what I'm saying? And Ivan Stewart, who I cannot imagine is not dead yet, when I first met, and I'm looking at a book, when I first met Ivan Stewart, he was very old. But Ivan Stewart wrote 2 books that I know of, and Ivan Stewart was very evangelistic, and Ivan Stewart wrote the book Go Ye, means Go Me, and then I think he wrote a book called From House to House, and it's about personal evangelism. And there's a note inside of Go Ye means Go Me, and it said, Ivan Stewart said, if congregations would just put in a little elbow grease, brain power, and start saying, what does it take to make it work, rather than just saying, it don't work, then we would move leaps and bounds. That's what Ivan Stewart said. Figure out how to make it work instead of saying it don't work. Because, we can say anything doesn't work. Like the fact I'm teaching on the internet right now. And someone says, well, we're going to start teaching on the internet. And that's where someone says, the internet is overly saturated. Nobody's going to find you. Okay, well, we're not even going to try. Now, let me make another point about controversy. In this book, Arkansas Angels, these men, gospel preachers in the state of Arkansas, some of them were, all of them being controversial and teaching just first principle sermons and the idea of promoting unity in one body. A couple of those people, the whole county of Arkansas did not even have a denomination. It is possible, but here's my thing. We look at the first century text and we say, oh, that controversy worked back then, but controversy won't work now. We don't like controversy. No one has ever liked controversy, which is why they killed Jesus. But then I show you Arkansas Angels and someone says, yeah, but that was 1800s rural America. You can't do that stuff in the city. Who said? There are people everywhere who want the gospel. And it's like you say, well, we're putting it out on the internet. I live in the city. I'm saying I live in the town with you. There is a bigger chance that I could come in contact with you one-on-one than you find something on the internet. Oh, if they're going to find us on the internet, it's a needle in a haystack. Well, how about I just go find them in the city? How about I do my job of personal evangelism and I go find these people who might be looking? I'm not out here saying one way or the other. Take advantage of the internet. Obviously, I'm on the internet. We're on local television. We're on 2 states' local television. I write in the newspaper every week. So stop giving me this business about, well, Caleb, why are you telling people there's only one way to evangelize? I never said that. What I did not say is I did not come along and say that local people can't do local work. That's Don Blackwell. He said that, not me. I'm still promoting door knocking, which is something you can do. Not everybody's going to teach on GBN. Not everybody's going to teach on what does the Bible say. But everybody can go talk to strangers. And everybody can go door to door. So, Ivan Stewart said, figure out how to make it work instead of just saying that it won't work. Get on the Informer, page-and-a-half Bible article, CalebGRobertson@gmail.com. Let your friends know about what does the Bible say on YouTube so they can see the school broadcast, all the archive videos and the playlists and the whatnot. And of course, all this is designed to help you better know your Bible without moving across America. And here's your biblical precedent. And if you just say, well, where I am, I'm not having a good time. I'm not getting to do work because these people are always discouraging me from working. it's all a mess. Can I just have a moment? The preachers, I always talk about the young preachers are scared to act because they will get fired. Well, these congregations that never withdraw fellowship from an immoral person, right? Just got folk in there drinking, cussing, gambling, smoking. They just shacking up even. And they never get withdrawn from. Isn't that crazy? But when Ted, a member of the local congregation, rises up and says, hey, I'm going door knocking. Anybody wants to go with me can come with me. And then everybody starts saying, who does he think he is? Talking about he's going to go door. And then they just start finding ways to move you out. Local congregations won't withdraw their fellowship from the immoral person, but local congregations will withdraw their fellowship from an evangelistic person. That's what you're up against. And so if you are a person who says, this is what blows my mind, if you think, well, maybe I will move to Martinsville, Virginia. Well, there's a very big chance that when you get out here, there's going to be stuff that you need to correct. And it blows my mind that people would say, oh, I love what does the Bible say? But then when they start needing to make corrections, they start bowing up, bristling up. And that's crazy. And it's also crazy that you would think about wanting to move out here, and then when you get here, you don't want to be evangelistic with us. Not happening. It's like, well, you moved all the way out here and you don't want to be evangelistic, then it'll be nothing for you to move somewhere else. That is exactly how we look at it. All this is designed to prep you for evangelism. And so I'd say, let's jump into the class. You got a 12-chapter book, and the first 6 chapters get ignored. We are wasting the book. We are wasting the Old Testament immensely. If, I said this on Sunday, if parents would read to their kids Hurlbut's Story of the Bible, that would help the preachers out so much. Like I'm saying, local congregations and the preachers and the elders teaching the Bible classes, instead of having to have these moments with the audience where the elder is teaching the audience and he says, Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody remember that story? Lot and his daughters. Everybody remember Sodom and Gomorrah? Lot is Abraham. Remember that? Instead of having to always wonder, do y'all know the Old Testament stories? If we consistently had parents reading Hurlbut's Story of the Bible, they would raise up into adults who know the Old Testament. And then the elders and the preachers could just freely maneuver and edify through the Old Testament. So that's why I keep recommending these 2 books. He Loves Forever, the story, The Message of the Old Testament by Tom Albright. Skinny little book. You could read it in no time. It will change the way you think about the Old Testament. The Old Testament is not doom and gloom, and it's certainly not dry. We're wasting the Old Testament text the way that we just keep teaching it. How do we teach it? We just go through and we say, Noah's Ark, Nadab and Abihu. Maybe we get Achan. We talk about, did Rahab lie? Just covering the same bases. We're not making any application. Now, that's what I want to do this morning. If you hear Daniel and you think Revelation, then you're wasting the book. Now, this is what I say, y'all. Can we not just say this is the heart of religion? In Matthew 15, you know what the context is. These Jews come out to Jesus and they say, hey, does it just not bother you that your disciples are not keeping the tradition of the elders by washing their hands when they're eating food? And Jesus just says back, does it not bother y'all that you observe these men's traditions and you ignore God's commands? And then he just starts talking to them. He quotes Isaiah to them. These people draw nigh unto me with their mouth, and they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. I mean, he looked at, you just mark it down, the Jews, if he were here in 2024, he would be saying this to his church. He would be saying this to the Church of Christ. You guys get very close with your mouth and you give me lip service, but y'all's hearts are very distant. And what is religion to most people? It's 1 hour a week, sitting in the pew, us few, nobody new, learning nothing new. So he said, your heart, your heart is far from me. And then he goes on and he has to have this conversation. Do you not understand? Like I'm saying, Jesus, obviously the master teacher, but he just sits there with you and he says, y'all don't get it, do you? Do you not understand Whatsoever enters in at the mouth goes into the belly, and it is cast out into the draught. You have your own cleaning mechanism. Your body does. Your body will take what it needs. It will cast out the waste. That's not the issue. But those things which proceed out of your mouth, that came from your heart, and that's what defiles the man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defiles not a man. I wish you guys be as worried about having a clean heart as you are having these clean palms. Now, I don't know why we don't transfer that into the book of Daniel. How? And let me say this too about Jeremiah and Ezekiel, because I primarily made that mostly about how God views the people, how God interacts with the people. How you view God determines how you act alongside of God. And I tell you, people who are super stringent on each other, like Matthew 18, the man choked his fellow servant. They have a concept that that's what God is doing to people. So they go around choking people by the throat and they say, well, I'm just doing what God would do. God would choke them to death. No, because in Matthew 18, God had just forgiven that man's massive debt. He didn't choke him. And so if you're looking at the Matthew 18 parable, essentially what we can find is we can see God's mercy right in front of us and absolutely ignore it and move on and just choke people. So, but if I start looking at this idea that God gives us the law, He sent out the prophets, that was to bring about repentance. So I can understand that God wants to have us on the best way possible, the law. He is concerned about bringing us back to the best way possible, prophets and repentance. And all through the text, it talks about His long-suffering and His patience. So why would I not start with a mind that says we need to repent when we need to repent? And we need to be consistently looking at the info that keeps us on the right way for our own benefit, for our neighbor's benefit. But if I'm looking at God and He's patient, then my idea should be to cultivate patience. And, everyone says, well, it's easier said than done. Look, this is the heart of religion. Your heart is far away from God. Now, this morning, this is what I'm going to talk to you about the book of Daniel in the first 6 chapters again. Okay, we're in the first 6 chapters, and this is, again, a broad overview of the book of Daniel because I don't have to go verse by verse. I want to talk about these concepts with you, what we should be getting away from or taking away from the book. What are you planning on teaching your kids? And this is the same idea. If you think Daniel, or you hear Daniel and you just think Revelation, then you're wasting the book. And if I ask you, what are you planning on teaching your kids? And you just say, well, if there's one thing that my boy's going to know, he's going to know the beasts of the visions. Daniel 7 has beasts. Daniel 2 has the colossal image. Daniel 8 has beasts, an image of beasts. Revelation 13, images of beasts. And you say, well, if there's going to be one thing, my boy, he's going to know eschatology. If there's one thing, my boy is going to be able to draw you a diagram of all these different visions and these different beasts. And I would say that person who says such a thing does not even understand the book of Daniel. And I'm saying they could possibly make me a chart where I would look at like their end times eschatology chart out of Daniel and Revelation. And I could possibly look at that and I would say, oh, I agree with this more than 90%. And I could still say that that person is missing the point of the book of Daniel. The visions were revealed to Daniel. The visions did not make Daniel who he was. Like when you think of the book of Daniel, and if you would control yourself and not jump to visions and eschatology, if you would look at the book of Daniel, is he not an absolute hero? Yes. But y'all, it's like this business that I said last week when I said Daniel in the lion's den. And someone says, yeah. I mean, we learned that back in Sunday school. I want to talk to you about Revelation 7 and connect it to Acts 1. If folk had focused up more on Daniel 6 being thrown in the lion's den for prayer, then we wouldn't have had America shutting congregations down. And I'm saying y'all's eschatology, your persecution and your tribulation, right? That did nothing for you in 2020. It's what y'all fixate on, and it went right out the window once the government said no more than 10 people in a room. Well, you know what? Romans 13 evidently trumps the entire book of Revelation, the laws of the land. It's dumb. And I'm saying it's a product of bad Bible study. Now, when we teach the book of Revelation, it is going to be about tribulation and persecution and how to basically live as a Christian. But y'all, if we don't recognize this, then we actually won't be like Daniel. You say, when the moment came, I would hope that I could rise to the occasion like Daniel. Well, I'm telling you this, Daniel didn't go into Babylon fixated on eschatology. Daniel went into Babylon with an education of the law of Moses, and the law of Moses created a fantastic person. Did you hear Sunday night John Shannon preaching under the tent? And it's an interesting point. But he said, the law of Moses never made a Pharisee. Boy, that's good. The law of Moses is what made Daniel, but the law of Moses never made a Pharisee. That's men's tradition is what John said, and it's absolutely right. So I say, what are you planning on teaching your kids? Now, as we get in this morning, this is a moment where someone says, what does Caleb really know about children? If you listen to that brief audio bumper, you heard Everett come in this morning, and Everett did his memory verses, and he can sing different songs, but he did Genesis 1:1 with us, and he did Isaiah 1:17, learned to do well. So I have in my head what I want for my kids. But even if you say, well, Caleb just got one kid and he's just a 2-year-old, what does Caleb know about kids? I can remember how I was raised, right? And I will, just say, I can look backwards. This will have a moment. I was a teenager like anybody else was a teenager. It didn't matter that my dad was Johnny Robertson. I didn't get into as the extensive amount of trouble as some teenagers do, but I did get into trouble. And, I had a period of time. This is one thing, too, that people don't believe about me when I say it. So sometimes when we're doing television, my dad and I will say, we get nervous. And people have just said back to us, no, you don't. Why do you think we have such bad stomachs? Like my dad has had bleeding ulcers. I have ulcerative colitis. You just don't think that we have nerves playing into any of these illnesses that we have? So, one thing when I said about my raising and how I was, y'all, I didn't read books. I'm always promoting books. And someone says, well, reading is easy for you. I did not start reading books until I was 17. And I was being a goofball at 14, 15, 16 years old. And I will say this, that a big thing, it's, you would look at it on paper and say, oh, well, that's not great. But it was something for me. And my dad looks backward at it, and he said it recently. When I was 17 is when my dad got colon cancer. And it was stage 3 colon cancer. And so, for a giant chunk of being 17, he wasn't even around because he went to Chicago to the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, and we were still down in Virginia, and that's where Mike and I, with the local men, did a tent meeting without Dad because he was up there getting cancer treatments. But I will say this, this is me in Madro. I'm probably about 3 years old, and the story is I had been told not to touch the extension cord. And so what did I do? I just sat there and I had concupiscence. What's that? Forbidden desire. That's a joke. That's not any type of allusion to born in sin. I'm trying to figure out why. Why can I not touch that thing? And even if I had touched it in the past, I've touched this before. They just don't know about it. So why can't I do it now? I'm born in a third world country. We stayed there till I'm about 3 or 4. We go back when I'm 9, and we stay a year, and Dad and I stayed sick the whole time that we were there. We had different illnesses back then. But I know, I'm saying about your kids in the book of Daniel, I know how I was raised, and when I come back to the States, from ages 8 to 13, for sure, my dad is taking me into people's homes, and he's having Bible studies with them, and I'm meeting people's kids that way. And, I'm seeing as a young child, my dad was doing a home Bible study with this family in the living room, and me and their little boy, we'd go in the back room and we'd watch TV and we'd play together. And there was another family member who sat in the furthest end of the hallway in the bedroom. He was in a wheelchair, and he never came out to Bible study. But he would be listening in his back room, and he'd get angry. And so one night, me and this little boy, we come out of the bedroom where we're playing, and we're coming to the kitchen, which is right next to their living room, and we're going to get something to drink. And while we're staying in the kitchen, the dude from the back comes wheeling out in his wheelchair, and he's angry. And I don't know, he's hollering, I don't know what he's saying, but the next thing you know, he's throwing my dad's whiteboard. My dad's conducting a home Bible study, he's using a whiteboard. People got their Bibles out and all this going, hey, what are we doing? And then somebody says, hey, we need to have prayer. And then my dad says, you can lead the prayer, I'm getting my boy out of here. So he gets me and we leave out of the room. I saw that as a child. That was my introduction to religion. Is my dad doing Bible studies, local brethren being interested in going with my dad to study with these people, and people being immersed out of those in-home Bible studies. So that's part of it. And, I've got one more. We'll come back. That's me at maybe 16. That's probably or 17 when my dad was away. What does Caleb know about kids? Well, I can remember my childhood, and I know how my dad raised me. And I have been involved in tent meetings most of my life. When I would have been 6, 7, Shannon was coming up and doing tent meetings in Bassett. And, it just starts there. So I've been involved in all this all of my life. And this is why I have this map. I said a lot last week when I came on talking about the book of Daniel. And I said these overbearing mothers who won't let their boys grow up. And I kept talking about these mothers who say, well, my 17-year-old can't, blah, blah, blah. So when I would have been 17 here. My dad was in the cancer treatment center. And then, my dad had the mind while he was getting his cancer treatments, I'm getting out of here and I'm going back to work. And so I was there in Chicago and I had my car. I'm 17. And my dad had me drive from the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, just up out of Chicago, around the bottom of Lake Michigan, and up to Ludington, Michigan. So I drove, at 17, my dad had me drive 6 hours by myself around Lake Michigan to go see Steve Baisden in Ludington, Michigan, and for him to show me how to work some of this technology that we were using for Ustream back then. It wasn't YouTube back then, it was Ustream. So would you have your 17-year-old drive around Lake Michigan to go, and also too, could you put your confidence in your 17-year-old that he was going to pay attention and then be able to reteach it when he gets back home? This is not me bragging on myself. I'm saying this is how I was raised, with responsibility, stuff getting put on me, and I'm like, what? Someone says, well, you put all that on a teenager, they get bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm glad that I wasn't just put into a closet and not ever getting to have any type of kingdom activity. So I know how I was raised. Doing stuff like that, even before that I was driving to just, again, it's simple things. Would you let your 16-year-old drive 3 hours away and pick somebody up at an airport? I don't know if I'd ever been there. I'm sure that I had. But during the tent meetings, when I was 16, I could drive. My dad was sending me off to Charlotte, North Carolina to pick people up at the airport and bring them back to the tent. You need, while your kids are at home, you need to assist them at having these challenges rather than always sheltering them. And I'm saying this because you say, what do I know about kids? Well, I know how I was raised, and I know what my dad was doing with me, and I know that along the way I was getting guided and assisted experience. And a lot of y'all are keeping your boys from that. And here's what I want to say about the book of Daniel as we get going into it. I wanted to say one more about the tent. I would have been 13 years old when my dad was doing the tent meeting in Bassett, and he was staying on TV with Brant Stubblefield and Rick Popejoy till midnight, and that was the year that the Pentecostals, I don't know if they were Pentecostal or Apostolic, but they were threatening to burn the tent down. And so it's just me and my mom in the camper at the tent. We're staying at the tent. And then a lady who's in the local congregation, her son was my childhood best friend, and he calls me on the phone, and he says, "Hey, are y'all okay?" And I said, "I'm 13," and he would have been 13 or 12. And I said, "Yes, why?" And he said, "Well, there's people on TV talking about they're going to burn your dad's tent down." He said, "I know y'all are staying there." He was very worried about me. And so this is where someone says, I can't believe Johnny had his wife and child up in that. Well, I lived through it, and I can't believe that none of y'all have put yourself in the situations that Johnny Robertson has. I can't believe that y'all's kids, I'm an alien to a lot of y'all's kids because of the way my dad raised me. The book of Daniel, essentially what you're reading, if you can think about it this way, we're making our turn. If you can think about the book of Daniel this way, I think it will be more beneficial to you. Let no man despise your youth. That is in the Bible as much as Acts 2:38 is in the Bible, and Christians ignore 1 Timothy 4:12 as much as Southern Baptists ignore Acts 2:38. Boy, do folk hate hearing from a young man. And my line has been, once I turn 30, y'all can't say anything to me again, because Jesus began his ministry at 30 years old, so you're not going to be telling me, well, we're not taking it off of you. Let no man despise your youth. If you're reading Daniel, essentially what you are reading is Joshua, part 2. You're reading Samuel, like little boy Samuel. You're reading little boy Samuel, part 2. You're reading David, part 2. Here's what I mean. In Exodus 33:11, Joshua, Moses, this is talking about Moses and the people of Israel, but it makes this reference just briefly. But his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. Joshua is a young man, and he is observing Moses. Why do y'all not have y'all's boys observe? Listen, I hear you. I'm talking to parents today out of the book of Daniel, and I say, why don't you have your children observing evangelism? And then you say back to me, Caleb, there is no evangelism happening amongst the preacher and the elders here. I understand that. That is just as much your fault for staying in an unevangelistic congregation. Don't try to pass the buck. You're the parent. That's your child. You bear the highest level of responsibility in this equation. So I get it. Your preacher is a loser, and he doesn't do any evangelism. I get it. Your elders are unqualified. If you're saying that to me, why are you staying there? You go to restaurants, you say, boy, the food here is terrible, but I come back every week. Public school systems, you say, the education here is a joke. Well, in America, you do have some senses of school choice, so you move your child to a different school. You're sick, you go to the hospital. The nurses here have no bedside manner. The doctors are ridiculous. You go to a different hospital. But you will call me on the phone, and you will tell me that your preacher doesn't know anything, doesn't preach anything, and you'll tell me how unqualified your elders are. You're part of the problem. You stay there. Congregations get the preaching they demand. And if they don't demand it, they get the preaching they deserve. When people tell my dad, they say, Johnny, he preaches, and they say, Johnny, we hadn't had preaching like that in 30 years. All you're doing is telling on yourself. You have been abiding lukewarm teaching for 30 years. You're part of the problem. So, if you get to studying Daniel, and you got some boys, are you someone who's at home and you got boys, your daddy, you got boys, the book of Daniel is going to help you. Now, a young man might be watching this and say, well, I don't have boys. So, that doesn't matter. You don't get to skip this class because you are a young man and say you don't have sons yet. You do not want to start prepping to be a parent the day the baby is born. And that's life. It's not someone says, parenthood. That's anything. You want to come in with some sense of head knowledge. I get it. You can't get experience till you get experience, but you want to come in with some form of head knowledge, and that's any field of life. So if you're a Christian and you want to marry a Christian, then you need to be looking at some parent material. If you're reading the book of Daniel, you're reading Joshua part 2. If you're reading Daniel, you're reading Samuel, part 2. Look at this. The child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. Everybody, you ask any Christian, do you hope that your child grows up to be a Christian? Oh, yes, of course. I've never heard anybody say, well, if he was an atheist, it wouldn't bother me. Well, if you want your child to grow up to be a Christian, then you're going to have to be putting religious elements in front of them. You're going to be having to have study with them. You have to condition them, or it's not going to work. This woman prayed for a child, and this woman decided to give her child to the high priest to minister underneath the high priest. Now, I will say this. Boy, if you are in a congregation that is offering opportunities for your child to be involved in local evangelism and you are not taking advantage of it, you're not a good parent. Why can't I say that? We see people do stuff with their kids all over the place and we say, that's bad parenting. If you are in a congregation and you're fortunate enough to have organized evangelism put in front of you and all that's said to you is, look, just participate, and then you don't take your kids to it, you are a bad parent and you are a big problem inside of the Lord's church. The child Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. And there was no open vision, but look at verse number 19. Samuel grew and the Lord was with him and did not let none of his words fall to the ground. So we have to be very specific. Why? Why are these kids not coming out to the evangelistic opportunities that are presented? Because they have way too many extracurricular activities. Everybody beats up on the sports, and I am not for it. We did not play organized sports. Part of it, my dad told me, number 1, it's time consuming. Number 2, it's expensive. Number 3, this was the one I heard the most. Dad said, I'm not going to be out here with all these hot-headed parents screaming at my kids. Look, I had a good childhood. Okay, I had a fantastic childhood. And so we didn't do organized sports, but can I tell you this? Someone says, well, Timmy's not coming because he's got ball practice. Yeah, well, they're not bringing their little girl to the evangelistic opportunity because she plays in the band. She plays in school band. Are we expecting these kids to do anything with school band? But they miss Bible class because they're out at the ball game as much as anybody else is. They're missing different opportunities with the church because of their band practice. And everything else, I'm saying you got all these different things that the public school is offering you and you think you got to do all of them. Well, and it's like, I know how to play piano. My wife knows how to play piano. I didn't have to miss any type of evangelistic opportunities because of my piano lessons. You got all this stuff going on for your kids. Oh, my kid's got to do this. And if my kid doesn't do this, he's not going to be well-formed. Said who? What's well-formed? Like the world? We might as well just put brackets up. Well-formed. Well-socialized. You want them to be worldly, is what you're saying. Someone says, Caleb is saying that it's worldly to participate in band. I just said I play piano. What's worldly is y'all putting things above church activities, kingdom work. Samuel was dedicated by his mother to the Lord. 1 Samuel 17, David. Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And when the Philistines looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and a fair countenance. So you do know that David is at least not old enough to be enlisted in the army of Israel. So whatever age you want him to be, he's a young teenager who cannot be enlisted in the army. We read these passages, and then what do we do with our kids? We do not at all install in them religious fervor. When you read Daniel 1, do you think that your child would have been selected like Daniel was? The king spake to the master of the eunuchs that he should bring certain of the children of Israel unto the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but were well favored. And they were skillful in all wisdom, and they were cunning in knowledge, and understanding in sciences, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's place, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Y'all teach y'all's kids to be athletes. You don't teach them to have a brain. If captivity came for America, would your boys be of any value? We say, they got a strong back. That's good. You want to have strong legs, strong back. Work is spelled F-U-N, and work is your best friend. I don't have a problem with that. But let's not basically be out here and say you got a strong back and zero brain. You ought to have both. And y'all, we just mark it down. If we're basically doing a survey through the congregations of the Church of Christ in America, no. The young men would not be selected if a nation came into America and basically said, we're going to look through this collection of people and we're going to see what they have to offer, because that is what Nebuchadnezzar was doing. Nebuchadnezzar said, we did just take a handful of people captive. Let's see what they at least have to offer to Babylon. And if they went through with a comb through a number of our young men, they would say, these boys ain't got much to offer to Babylon. And that's not the elder's fault. That's your fault. It's not the preacher's fault. That's daddy's fault. What else should I think about when I read the book of Daniel? I want my kids to be intelligent. I'm not saying that kids have to make straight A's. But y'all, the goal is to get your kids ready for life. And here we go. What does Caleb know? I know how my dad raised me, and I was getting ready for life. I've told y'all before the amount of times that I would be in the car and I had just bought either a new toy or a new video game, and I would do work around the house. I'd do work for other people and get paid, and I'd make money. And then I'd get someone to take me to the store, and then here comes my dad to just ruin everything by having a talk with me about contentment. I just spent $60, and Dad says, we're going to be here in another however many months. He said, because you will think in your head, I need a new game. And he said, this is what the Bible calls contentment, to be satisfied, to where you basically just say, I'm in a cycle here where I spend my money and I just do it all over again. And that's then he would know I'm not liking it, and he would say, if I don't tell you these things, what's the point in having a daddy? A lot of y'all are growing up without a daddy. There's no doubt you got a man living in the house, but y'all ain't got a daddy because they're not teaching you anything. I picked up the concept of work from my dad. We worked, and it was like pay attention and do a good job. That was really put into us. Do a good job. Man. And y'all, we did. That's another one. It's in the Bible. Do all things without murmurings and grumblings and complainings. We got in trouble for complaining. I remember one time unwinding an extension cord, and I basically was making it last longer because I wouldn't stop complaining about who did it this way, who put this thing up. Just kept going on and on and on. Then I got in trouble, and I still got to unwind that thing. Concepts, discipline, education. I just don't know why Christians, who are supposed to be the salt and light of the world, do not believe in these moral principles and character. Look, education is not pieces of paper. Grades and degrees, you can be very well educated and not have multiple degrees, and there's plenty of people who have degrees and they're not well educated. Would your child be looked at by Babylon and say, what do they have to offer? And I would say that the bulk would be no. Lazy, dishonest, unobservant, just unwilling to even calculate basic pieces of information. And here's the thing too. There will be some people who watch this and they'll just sit there and say, boy. And they say, I don't like Caleb talking about my child this way. You made them that way, dude. The world is going to have its view of your children, whether you like it or not, and it is based on how you molded and shaped them. and forgive the world when they give you their honest opinion of what you made. And the thing about it is someone will get into Daniel 1 and they'll say, yeah, well, Caleb, you're talking about being skillful in knowledge and understanding and cunning and having ability. And they say, but that's God-given. No, that's an excuse. All these people that are talking about they can't, that's another thing that we grew up with when we were working with Dad and we couldn't do something. That's what we said. We said, well, I can't do it. And Dad would say, it's not that you can't do it, it's that you won't do it. You figure out how to do it. And sure, like you're just basically saying, I'm going to use my back to pick this up, and then he comes along and he says, are you thinking about how this could be done and it not just be straight out of your back? That's where I'm saying you put some of these kids on the job and they won't even take a moment to look at it and say things like work smarter, not harder. Are y'all's kids growing up with stuff like this? Work smarter, not harder. I was raised up hearing knowledge is power. And I'm now doing my studies of the Old Testament. And I just recognize that so many of these principles I grew up with are in the Old Testament. And they came from my Christian daddy. So here's what someone says. Well, all that stuff that you mentioned, the Bible says about Daniel, look, it says God gave him that knowledge. And as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all the visions and the dreams. Look, this is after that description. Okay, these boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, they went in this way. And when they are observed to be exceptional, then this verse comes in. God gave them knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom. And even though it's after, I would say this is debatable. The question becomes how? You take 4 young men who are capable and have ability, and then God decides to use them and gives them even more, perhaps miraculously? Or perhaps this is still just referring to the education that they got out of the law of Moses. And listen, when we get educated by the Bible and it benefits us, God gets the credit. We would be nothing without God's education. So that doesn't, like someone says, no, you're making about the man and his own efforts and his study. No, God gets the credit for when we benefit. Now, at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, the prince of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than them all of the magicians and the astrologers that were in his realm. These young men have skill, they're cunning, understanding, ability, and are learning. And then he observes them and says, these young men are 10 times better than what Babylon has to offer. And that is exactly how Christian youth, folk raised by Christians, young people raised by Christians, ought to have this. You're getting all manner of opportunities by getting biblical morals. And the problem with these kids is that their parents were not giving them biblical principles and morals so that they could come up. I was only in public school very briefly. I started homeschooling at 3rd grade. And I went into school knowing that if I got in trouble at school, I'd get in trouble when I got home. And my dad was telling me, these boys that are in class with you, the ones who act out, he said, they're trying to get attention. And they're trying to get attention at school because they don't get attention at home. And then he said, but you get attention at home. So you don't need attention when you go to school. You need to pay attention. I had that. And there's plenty of y'all who are out there and you're giving that to your kids and you're homeschooling your kids, which is very good. Homeschooling your kids is the best option right now. This is what we ought to have. They ought to be 10 times better than the youth of America. And if they are what they ought to be according to the Bible, they will indeed look massively different than the youth of America. But y'all got y'all's youth looking just like those youth. 2 youths, right? They are just as dirty and as vulgar and as materialistic as anybody else out there because folk have just been sitting in a pew, but their heart has not been connected to Jesus. Now, here's what a mother does, and not all of them, but y'all, there are such things as these overbearing mothers. A mother reads Joshua and David and they say, I'm not raising a soldier for the battlefield. So again, I said this last time, and I said, I just don't understand y'all's childhood. I can remember growing up and hearing my mother say, it wasn't like my mother sat me down and looked at me, but I would hear her say, like just in passing, you're not allowed to be in law enforcement. You're not allowed to be in the military. And she was saying these things that could potentially be harmful to her babies. And I said this last week, I never took that seriously. Like my mama said, my mother certainly controlled me at home, absolutely. And then she had the authority of telling me what to do. But it was just like, that was never there, that my mother said I can't do these things when I'm grown. And like someone says, I don't know that you really remember that. I always had a concept that anything my mother said could be overridden by my father. And I had an absolute concept of obeying her and minding and being well behaved. But I'm just saying, some of y'all's boys, man, y'all have raised them where it's like they just have this complex about their mothers. Now, here's my statement back to this. A mother says, I'm not gonna raise a soldier to go out and die on the battlefield. Well, here's my alternative to you. Could y'all please raise an intellectual activist? Man, well, I'm not going to have a boy die for any cause. Fine. Can you at least put someone in the room who can put together 2 + 2 = 4? How are y'all's kids so ignorant? Another thing about childhood. What does Caleb know about kids? I remember how we were raised. So I'm telling you, look, we're getting work ethic and we're getting principles all over the place. And I'm raised up doing tent meetings. I'm raised going with my dad into these home Bible studies. And I'm raised up door knocking. And I'm raised staying out late. Like, it's a school night. They can't be out late. We'd be out late with our dad at the TV station, watching him do What Does the Bible Say live, taking people's belligerent phone calls from the community. That was our childhood. Now, when I say your kids are ignorant, my dad, this was just one, it was random. My dad had us in the driveway, and I do think it was very random. I felt like the way I remember, we would have just been out playing, and somehow it turned into like this conversation about, not like a full-blown conversation, but I'm saying he wanted to know if we could repeat these passages that dealt with obeying the gospel. And so we started doing this drill to where we were at the bottom of the driveway, and every time you got a correct answer, you could take a step forward. But if your next answer was incorrect, you had to take a step backward. And so by the end of that process, we were doing, hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized, with the accompanying verses. And this is a moment where someone says, this sounds weird. No, it's not. When I went to public school and we were doing math on the computer, math exercises, you had a race car that would progress every time you did a multiplication correctly. But if you got an incorrect answer, your car would start dropping backwards. It's a game. We're children, but we're learning. And I'm saying, y'all, I came away with some Bible knowledge out of this, okay? So there was that. There was memorization. He would basically say, if someone was going to get a video game, this was another one. When we were, however old, my brother's 6 years older than me, and Dad said, whoever, like you memorize your books of the Bible, Old Testament there's 39, New Testament there's 27, and he said, whoever can repeat them back to me the fastest gets to choose the video game. We had a PlayStation. Whoever can repeat them back the fastest gets to choose the new video game. Well, I don't like that. He's got us mowing grass for widows, right? He's got us door knocking, going with him to Bible studies, spending time with him as he hosts a television broadcast, riding there, riding back home. And then he's got these other little things couched in there to get his boys to work on their memory bank. And all he was doing was challenging us. Can you raise an intellectual activist? Because that is what Daniel was. Let me go backwards.
In fact,
Are y'all keeping up with this? This is Russell Brand. Last Sunday, Russell Brand was immersed. Russell Brand has been just massively like a drug addict, an abuser of alcohol, a womanizer. When he did stand-up comedy, it was just atrociously vulgar. And then at some point in his life, he starts looking around and he says, I know I'm looking for something. And he starts going through world religions and he starts looking at religious material. And then this person is a literal person, like where we would say, what can you imagine of someone who read their Bible for the first time? Someone read the Bible for the first time ever, what would they come away with? This is him. This is the person who read his Bible for the first time ever, and the ideas that he came away with was that he needed to be immersed in water, not sprinkled, not poured. He said, I need to be immersed in water, and he made the accompanying passages of Romans 6 and Colossians 2, and he said, it's this invitation to die with the Christ. Boy, you talk about hitting it. He's someone who has read the Bible for the first time. And listen to what he says about the book of Acts.
A man who shares your surname, Eugene Peterson's book, The Message. And what I was struck by in this version of Acts was the vivacity, the lividness and vitality of the book, and how the sense of urgency of Christianity, that think of the critiques that are often slung in your direction. Conservatism is staid. This is a very sort of, and admittedly it's 2,000 years old, but a very sort of a vibrant call to arms, an urgent sense that, oh my God, we're living in an atrophying and dying ideology. We must become alive with Christ. We must change the world. And even the accounts that are given in there are accounts of people jailed and on trial, that even though it is literally biblical, it's very distinct from the Old Testament with its locusts and its deserts and its tribes and its manna. Now it sort of feels overtly and literally political. Like there are accounts of people jailed and on trial, that even though it is literally...
Russell Brand is absolutely the person who read their Bible for the first time, and we're looking at the impression that someone gets, an adult who reads the Bible for the first time, what they come away with. And he said, if someone's a follower of Christ, they have the idea that we will change the world, and we are willing to be in prison, and we will go through trial processes to do it. And what we have is a bunch of mamas who won't get out of the way, and what we have is I am not worried about upsetting women. And you got these elders out here who are worthless, who could not mentor a young man if they wanted to. We need to have a broad, national, collective moment of repentance where we say we owe it to our kids to do a better job. They're not going to the NFL. They're not going to the NBA. They're not going to play on the PGA. We have all this stuff ahead of us, and then you say, well, Caleb, I'll be honest with you, I'm not too worried about my kids playing sports. I hear you. Good for you. But then we still have parents, even if it's not sports, we're teaching them to be massively materialistic. This is again where I say, are none of y'all getting talks? Are you not giving talks to your kids about contentment? I grew up with contentment. I don't know what is happening to y'all. And I loved to spend money when I was a kid. And basically when I got bigger and stuff started costing more and whatnot, and I mean, I had to buy my first car, right? So I had to buy my first car. It started getting real. Contentment. Can you make an intellectual activist, please? Russell Brand reads the Bible and says, the Christians in the first century had a mission to change the world, and they were willing to be imprisoned for it. And what do y'all have y'all's kids doing? The book of Daniel should change your thinking on parenthood. Here's the current plan for discipling kids. We put them in a public school 8 hours a day for 5 days a week for 12 years. And the flip side, the religious element is 1 hour, 1 day a week for 12 years. And y'all, I just don't know what you expect to accomplish out of VBS. I don't even know how long VBS lasts. 3 nights a year, and let's just say for 7 years. I don't know how long kids keep going to VBS. This, put it in brackets, is an incredibly stupid game plan. This is the worst game plan that we could have possibly drawn up. Well, I mean, hey, my boy needs to learn mathematics. The public school system is about taxation. They don't care about your kids. And I mean, we got kids that are passing with failing grades. We got kids that are coming out that are illiterate. And they're always documenting who's in class because it always affects tax dollars. This is just nothing more than a national pig and your tax dollars. And you think it has anything to do with your child's education. The Bible class teachers here probably aren't even good. The VBS is just a bunch of games. You know, this is not an education moment. You call it what you want to. It's cookies and Kool-Aid and playing games and whatnot. Look, if you want to have cookies and Kool-Aid and games, then just do it. Why does it have to have the veil of religiosity to it? It's just an incredibly stupid game plan. And I'm saying right now, while this is incredibly stupid, here is the problem. The problems are dads. Like, I spent a lot of time on the overbearing mother. The problems are dads. Dads are not teaching their own kids. It's not the Bible class's teacher to teach your kid. Your kid is not going to grow up off of 3 days of VBS. And, you know, and here's the thing, too, about parents. If the eldership started talking to you about how your home is being orchestrated, then a bunch of y'all would probably start bowing up. Hey, like, I understand you're the elder of a local congregation, but you're not going to talk to me about my household. You know what I would do if I was an elder? I would be moving them out of the congregation. You can't do that. Where are y'all getting y'all's ideas about what we can and cannot do? Please tell me. Nothing more than your tradition and what you have seen. Look, I'm not going to be an elder to watch over your soul, and the Bible say I give an account for you, and then you tell me I don't get to talk about your household. Well, then you're not under this eldership, dude. You're leaving. If I'm an elder, I give an account for you. So yes, I am in your business. That's how an eldership ought to work. I don't remember what exactly was going on, but it was where my aunts live in Texas, and the elders didn't know anything. The elders didn't know anything about what people were doing, what they were involved in. And my aunt said to my dad, she said, well, Johnny, they can't know what everybody's doing. And my dad said, hey, that's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They are supposed to know what people are doing with their lives. That's their job. The eldership is a job, which is why in the New Testament you have more discussion about paying elders than you do these located preachers. Paul was an evangelist. Paul was out teaching lost people. He was not doing the American scene of the located preacher who does nothing. They were paying elders for the biblical education. So what we have are dads who are absent fathers. They're at home, but they don't teach. And if dads are not teaching their kids, then they themselves are not learning. You have to be involved in something to be able to teach it. You have to be able to have it in you to give it to someone else, and the parents don't. And this again, if I were an elder, I would be telling the parents, like newcomers in, they're new converts, they don't know any better, well, you're going to start knowing better. Otherwise, why are you here? And so what dads need to do is they need to start reading more. They need to read their Bible. They need to read books on parenting. They need to read books on communicating effectively. They need to stop making these excuses of, well, I don't have the gift of gab. Get over it, dude, because your kids are on the line. You're going to need to give them what they need, or the world is going to get them. Everybody knows that the statistics are that kids are more likely to attend church in their adulthood if their father was a churchgoer. If your kids see that you're not serious about religion, then just, excuse them for not taking it any more seriously than you do. The difference between you and them is they just don't sit in a pew for an hour. And they have every right to call you out on your inconsistencies. It's a problem that you're not surrounding yourself with people who want to read books. I would not stay in a congregation with people who do not want to better themselves. I would not stay in a congregation where the people don't read. Everything on this screen are books that I have either given away or local brethren have given to me. The birth order book, I am concerned about raising kids and having older brother complex, having middle child complex. There's a lot of complexes to go around in a household. And, I don't know if they have a term for it, but baby complex basically is babies are accustomed to getting their way and being the center of attention. So it's on loan to me by a local brother, the birth order. The Moral Judgment of the Child by Jean Piaget was given to me by a local brother who is concerned about being a good parent. Dare to Discipline was given to me. I have given it away. Indoctrination, that book says, Indoctrination, Public Schools and the Decline of Christianity. I have given that book away. Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. I have given that book away. I will continue to give that book away. That man is telling people to read their Bibles and telling your boys to stand up straight, look people in the eye, be confident, and shake their hand firmly. He is very, very much into his Bible right now. And I give this book away, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. There's more than one person has said this. The quote is, outside of the Bible, nobody has written on the nature of man as much as William Shakespeare. And y'all, to study men and the way they betray each other and the games they play and the politics that they play. And I say everybody is playing the game whether you want to or not. The difference between all players is some people play it well and some people don't. So you want your boys to come up with a strong back, but you want them to also have the understanding of work smarter, not harder. I give all these books away. These books have been given to me. I would not stay in a congregation where none of the men want to read material. I would not stay in a congregation where the eldership is not involved in the people's lives to help them orchestrate their homes. Yes, all of this is coming out of Daniel chapter 1 because I asked the question, would our boys be looked at by a Babylonian king and say, what do they have to offer to Babylon? And if we had an opportunity and a question would ask, I think that the majority of our young men would be overlooked. It's not the boy's fault, it's the parents' fault. And you know what? When I say Daniel received the visions, but it wasn't, the visions are not what made Daniel who he was. The law of Moses made Daniel who he was. Now, we're going to talk about the timeline in just a moment, but I have to say this. As a young man, Daniel had to be raised differently than most of our young men are raised. Here's what I say a moment ago about, look, I said, boy, that's a stupid game plan. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 12 years, up against what we give them in Sunday school and VBS. Boy, that's stupid. This is what the Christian home should look like. Someone said, that's Deuteronomy, that's a Hebrew. This is what the Christian home should look like. These words, which I commanded thee this day, shall be in your heart. Thou shalt teach them diligently unto your children. And you shall talk of them when you sit in your house. If you are forming a house with your wife where no Bible study happens in the home, don't expect your kids to stick around. If you think that these boys are going to come up by Sunday morning only, you are incorrect. I'm not saying that they can't abide tradition. Oh, you can be successful in giving them tradition, but I'm talking about making a strong and informed man. You will not do it without Bible study in the home. When you walk by the way, I don't know why, I don't know why y'all are making these babies if you don't want to spend time with them. Because they grow up and they spend all their time with the teachers at public school. And outside of the teachers, they spend all their times with the coach and the assistant coach. And then they're riding the bus to the ball game, back from the ball game. You're the parent and you've got the smallest fraction of time with your own child. It's crazy. It's ungodly that you're not taking your kids, like I'm saying, on walks where conversation is had. Listen, you don't have to sit down at a table with books strewn everywhere to have Bible study with your children. You can take them on walks and you can talk to them and you can communicate them when you lie down. This is as clear and as explicit as the Bible could be. I want you to teach your children. When? When you're at home. When you're going out on walks. Before you put your children to bed. When they get up in the morning, I want you to be having these conversations. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and thou shalt be as frontlets between your eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of your house. Look, I'm just saying, man. There are kids out there, are boys out here who grew up and their dad decorated the house with sports paraphernalia. You're in Tennessee. Oh, did y'all know that Peyton Manning was a Tennessee Vol? Now you do, because you came to my daddy's house and he's got Peyton Manning all over the house. Did you know Peyton Manning, he played for the Indianapolis Colts? Oh, now you do, because my daddy's got Peyton Manning all over the house. Did you know that he played for you live in Denver? Did you know Peyton Manning was a Denver Bronco? Now you do, because we got Peyton Manning all over the house. It's pathetic. Well, someone says, that's just what my daddy was interested in. Your daddy was a perpetual child. You spend money buying Peyton Manning paraphernalia. Peyton Manning doesn't even know you exist. You're a man putting another man who doesn't know you exist on the wall. And you teach your boys to do it. My kids will grow up getting their heroes out of the Bible. Another thing that we were taught at home, music. My dad told us, hey, we can like the music. We're not going to be celebrating the artist, okay? So we didn't have Van Halen posters. We weren't wearing Van Halen t-shirts, stuff like that. Just any of it. We weren't doing any of that. We didn't have just loads of that stuff. Whoever, sports figures, celebrities, actors, musicians, we did not have those people up on the wall. And that type of stuff was illustrated to us. I don't know. It's what I heard, and I don't know if my dad said it. But I know did Elvis Presley die on the toilet? I don't know. But my dad did talk about Elvis Presley and all of his drug problems. And you're the king. You're the king of rock and roll. And you're on all these drugs. And that just has consistently been the thing. I think Ian taught the Bible class on Sunday, or it was Joey at 9 o'clock. Someone referenced having all the money in the world. Both Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates have both been divorced. You got all the money in the world and you can't keep a marriage together. What did that accomplish? All these people, you got all the money in the world and your kids don't like you. Just on and on and on. So I'm giving you prescription out of the Bible on, someone says Proverbs 22:6 is a bit vague. Train up a child. Who knows what that means? Here it is. That's what that means. Talk to them in your home. I would say decorate your home. I have, when I saw Steve Wolfgang, when I interviewed Steve Wolfgang, I took his master's thesis and I had him sign the cover page when he presented it to Butler University. So I had him autograph it, and then when I came home, one of the local brothers, Roger, he is like a specialist carpenter, and he makes these very beautiful frames for me. And so I have that framed, and it's just this little note. of Daniel Sumner. This is a moment where, and I did the same thing with Alan Hires. Alan Hires signed Big F Fellowship, Little F Fellowship. Roger framed it, and Rubel Shelley signed that. When you watch the interview, and I had that yellow edition of Mission magazine that was basically for Rubel, he signed it. And this is where someone would say, well, Caleb, those are all sinful men, and you talk about inconsistent and liberal and anti and blah, 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 blah. They're not Eddie Van Halen. Right? It's not like it's Jerry Seinfeld. Just whoever you can come up with. And it's people who put some contribution on the thinking table. I wish that there could have been more evangelism. And when you see the interview with Steve Wolfgang has some very good local evangelism and personal work behind his name. And I say the same thing for Rubel. When he was a young man working at Getwell, the elder said Rubel could have had a debate every single week if the elders hadn't held him down. Well, what a bunch of losers they were. In your house, when you're walking, when you're getting up, when you're laying down. Here's Deuteronomy 7, 2 through 4. Daniel came to Babylon with religious education, and that's why he was impressive. The law of Moses made Daniel what he was. It's not the visions that he receives later in the book that makes him what he was. It's the education. So here's the next one. Y'all don't teach them, you don't teach your kids any Bible, and you are not installing into your kids, do not marry a non-Christian. Deuteronomy 7, everybody this is Moses right before he dies, talking to the second generation right before they go into Canaan, and Moses says, let me tell you, don't marry any of these people. Okay, do not marry them. Neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter shall not go to their son, nor their daughter to take your son. For they will turn away your children from God, and they will serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy thee suddenly. How do you train up a child? You encourage them to marry a Christian. Marrying a non-Christian is in the top 3, one of the biggest mistakes you can make in your life. People will watch this right now and they say, well, I married a non-Christian, there's nothing I can do about it now. Well, what I would say is don't give up trying to change them. Do not become comfortable living with a non-Christian. They are a child of the devil. They are not on the same page with you. You need to have it in your mind. Hey, I love them and I'm living with them and we share a bed together and we made these kids together and whatnot, but they are not operating on the same mission statement you are, so do not become confused and don't let your guard down. If you say there's nothing you can do about it, well, there is one thing you can do about it, and that is change them, convert them. Keep a good attitude, and we'll talk about that at the end. Daniel 6:10, Daniel got in trouble for praying three times a day. I bet you he grew up with that practice. Daniel knew that the writing was signed, and he went to his house, and his windows being opened in the chambers toward Jerusalem, he kneeled down upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. He probably grew up with that, and he probably grew up knowing Psalm 55:17, where King David had said, evening, morning, and at noon I will pray and cry aloud, and he will hear my voice. My dad, I said again, I briefly was in public school, but my dad told me when I was in 2nd grade, he said, when you guys start your morning, he said, do you guys say the Pledge of Allegiance? And I said, yes. And then he said, and then do they give you a moment of silence? And I said, yes. And then he said, when you have the moment of silence, what do you do? I said, I just stand there. I'm waiting for the moment to be done. And I was 8 years old, I'm in 2nd grade, and my dad said, in the moment of silence, could you pray for me? And I was 8, and he probably meant every bit of that for himself. Pray for me, as much as he was thinking that he was telling his boy about prayer. Because when we were kids and my dad would have us pray, he had a thing that he said about kids. He believed that God especially heard the prayers of little children, and the way my dad would say is because they are so soon come from God. And so he would say, in the moment of silence, can you pray for me? In public school, my dad, I don't remember what he said it was. It was either $100 or a $20 bill, and we would go in and we would tell kids if they could show us Christmas in the Bible, they could have the $20. And my best friend in second grade, he said, "Oh yeah, I'll go home and tell." He said, "I'll go home and tell my mom." He said, "Because we read the Bible." He said, "I'm gonna tell her tonight." And he came back and he said something about, they never found it. Obviously, I don't remember what he said. And then in Daniel 6:10, he's not just praying 3 times a day. When he goes up into his area to pray, his windows being open in his chamber, he prayed toward Jerusalem. Daniel knew what Solomon said in 1 Kings 8:30. So I absolutely believe that he knew Psalm 55:17. And he clearly knows 1 Kings 8:30, where Solomon says, "Hearken thou to the supplications of thy servant and of thy people Israel, when they will pray towards this place." So Daniel's in Babylon, and he prays towards Jerusalem. Well, that's exactly what Solomon said. That's why I'm saying this young man was raised up on the law of Moses. He was raised up by, clearly has to be, serious hands-on parents. So you read the Bible and you say, would you want your boy to be like Daniel? Oh, yes, I'd like my boy to be like Daniel. Then act like it. When you read the book, Daniel, it says, God brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So, people who know us will tell you. I had a friend of mine when we were in school, and we were all having dinner together. I'm talking about preaching school. We were all having dinner together, and I don't remember what we were talking about, but this person said to me, we're all having dinner together, and they said, of the people that I know, to me, she said, of the people that I know, you are the least likely to compromise ever on anything. And then someone might say that's just a statement of being hard-headed. But, and someone might hear that and say, well, that just means you're never going to change. No, I have the capacity to change, but when I change, I'm not going to compromise with my change. And here's what I'm saying about that. People, if they looked at me and my dad and they would say, voted most unlikely to compromise. People who know us like us. I have my principles and I have my convictions. That does not then translate to I'm a unlikable person. It doesn't translate to I'm an unlikable person. When my dad preached one lesson at the Portland Lectures, the statement that Cody McCoy said, he hugged my dad after my dad got done preaching at Portland Lectures, and Cody McCoy said, "You are a very misunderstood person." I don't know where Cody McCoy is these days, if he would still say that, but that is what he said then. It's not that we're dislikable. And I said last week, I'm accustomed to losing friends. Well, you have to ask the question, who changed? Did Johnny change or did his friends change? Did I change or did my friends change? So you can teach your kids to have principles and convictions, and you can teach them to be dedicated to those things. And they can still be likable people. And there's a load of stuff that I can be flexible. I had a phone call the other day with one of the brethren outside of this area, and we were having biblical conversation, and we were taking what the Bible clearly says. We were then bringing it into realms where there might be different variables, and it would come down to judgment. And I just said, when y'all make an informed conclusion, I said, I'm not going to be second-guessing y'all about that. Look, it's not a problem. In Daniel 6, 3 through 14, let me have a moment. 3 through 14. Daniel had an excellent spirit. Hey, are you wanting to comment on the broadcast?
I didn't know you're on, but I
okay,
tuned in and you were saying my name, so now I'm curious. In the sense of they changed, not us.
Right.
I'm very curious about the changes that people are making.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know if people are looking at the video that you put up.
Mm-hmm.
Are they?
Right now or the other one?
The one that you put up about GBN.
Yeah, they are. Very much so.
And, what I'm constantly responding to, Caleb, is individuals saying that Don didn't say what you said he said.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just have one question. Did Don recommend tent meeting and door knocking? No.
No.
So in the context of not recommending them, but bringing them up, what else could he have been saying? That only leaves one option.
Right.
And so he didn't recommend them, and they're saying that he didn't say something against them. Well, there's not an in-between if you're bringing it up. So did he just bring it up just to muse about the history or the good old days?
If he didn't even want to talk about it, he could have just ignored it. But
he just ignored it?
He could have just ignored it, but instead he went out of his way to tell everybody in the room they don't work.
And in the context, the sermon was about what we need to do going forward if we're going to make it. And so my observation is GBN has been going since at least the 90s, in the 90s, with Barry Gilreath. And they had offices in Dalton, Georgia, big humongous setup. It's no longer in existence. And they're now telling us what we need to do to survive. Why do we need to do anything if GBN was the answer?
Right.
They haven't been the answer in any sense. Do you have any idea how many people are on the lineup at GBN?
Not really. These days it's, my way of thinking is it's just primarily Don and then Aaron. And of course they'll have other stuff that gets broadcasted, but it's like Cliff Goodwin. I don't know.
Yeah, filler. If you went through the schedule and looked for 24 hours a day, those guys, for the most part, and I'm saying I would give them 90%, but I doubt very seriously it's even 90. I'm saying 90%, and that leaves them 10% that may be being evangelistic, and that's a stretch. So 90% of them are talking to each other, talking to the church, and we absolutely know there are minimal, like just fractional results at best and let's pretend that we don't know how much money is being spent. Let's say the hundreds of thousands of dollars instead of the other word that we could put in that starts with an M.
Yeah.
What are the results? And, the part that bothers me, Caleb, is people act like we're saying that we're the answer. We're saying we're one local work.
Yes.
If you would multiply some local works
and
based on...
One thing that you just said about GBN is supposed to fix all of our problems. They've been around since the 90s. And you said, well, then they're clearly not the answer to the problem because they've been here with us. And, someone could say back to you, well, you've been doing television at least since the early 2000s. But what I would say is a handful of people refuse to adopt the controversial stance. And so they don't do anything in their local area. Do you get what I'm saying? I do. And that's what I was saying just then, is that we're just one, and we have in anybody's estimation, we have amazing results for one local work with no money that was started in a mission field. And then on top of that, Caleb, we have to do this in spite of the constant determination by those around us to stop us. In our local area, everybody opposes us. When we moved to Rocky Mount, North Carolina, that area, all of the churches of Christ oppose us while we broadcast in their area, and they're dying. And so with all the opposition, and I'm saying it is opposition, we continue to put forth effort and I'm just saying an amazing result. I'd like to hear anybody that's doing local work speak negatively to our return. 3.5 million views on our YouTube, the amount of preachers that have been baptized out of denominations, and on and on and on. So we're just saying, one, if they could multiply what we're doing, then we would see results. Yeah, when you say multiply what we're doing, it back again is not saying, we're not saying support what does the Bible say while you do nothing locally. We're telling everyone, crank up your local activity. And we're not asking them to give us anything. Yeah. Just Luke 5, do what we're doing, and that's all we're encouraging people to do. Well, one of the things when you said about asking the question, people are saying Don didn't say what I said he said.
Yeah.
And then you said, well, he certainly didn't promote door knocking, and he did not promote tent meetings. And the thing, they said about, and I knew that he said it, but it doesn't take away from what he also said. He said, now, if you're doing it and it works for you, keep doing it. And I said, everybody's treating his statement like Baptists do Mark 16:16. It doesn't matter what he said on the front. We're just going to get the backside.
Yeah.
And then also, when you said a moment ago, what else could we possibly take away from his statement when he said they don't work like they used to? And then all I said is, okay, he just told us they don't work. It's the same thing. Like, we know how to use our brain when we say Mark 16:16 and Acts 2:38 are not word-for-word copies, but do they say the same thing? Yes. So when he said what he said, he gave a blanket statement to everybody. Don Blackwell does not believe that door knocking and gospel tent meetings work.
Well, he even did a little parenthetical when he said it. He said, every time I say this, somebody, he pounded or they pound and said something about door knocking. And he said, when they say that to me, if it works for you, then do it.
Yeah.
So he clearly demonstrated that people complain when he makes that statement. And then he has to answer, well, why are you making that statement anyway? Does that make sense? Why are you making that statement anyway? Yeah. And so the whole of it was clear. We got to do something new. And while I'm talking about do something new, by the way, tent and door knocking is likely not going to work like it used to.
Yeah. And then one of his suggestions was clean up the building.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's everybody's been game plan for everybody. Build a new building. If you build it, they'll come. So.
And no check.
And what?
Did you hear? No checks. He said that I think it's one of his relatives said the only time they ever write a check is when they give their contribution.
Mm.
And so he was making a plug for all of the different kinds of mediums where you can give money.
Mm-hmm.
And, that if you really think about it, who's giving online in that picture? And who are they giving to? GBN.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I don't know anybody that really is serious that thinks GBN is the answer. You just got a whole lot of people on there just talking about you being vicious.
Yeah, and malicious and whatnot. Well, one thing that you said too about, people are not taking it seriously. They got personal for a lot of people. One thing that you said was people who say, well, GBN is the answer. And you said, well, GBN is right there in Memphis and it didn't say Get Well.
Yeah.
So it's like, Get Well can't even rely on GBN. Everybody has to have local fervor. No.
Well, anybody, go ahead.
You go ahead. I wouldn't say anything else.
Anybody that is aggravated about what you said that supports us, how about you just stop supporting us? Now, how much support do you think we're going to lose? 0. There's nobody that supports us
Okay.
that is mad about you saying that kind of stuff. It's the people out there who are, and I doubt that 99% of the people that are talking even support GBN. They just don't like us. Again, we continue to make progress in spite of all the haters. So, y'all just go on. They're really doing what we want. All the attention from your video is being put on whether or not GBN is actually accomplishing anything for the greater good long term of the growth of the brotherhood.
Yeah. Well.
So thank you for putting it out there.
Okay. Thank you. Now, like even we have that conversation, the point, I don't know if he could see the screen when he was calling in, and my point was, we can be very blunt. And Dad actually was meeting with an individual over the weekend, and that's what they said to Dad. They asked him a question, and then he said, Johnny, do you think it's good or bad? And then he said, and be frank. Good friends. It was Steve Wiggins. Be frank with me. What's wrong with that? If we're not going to be honest with each other, what are we doing? And if you're telling me that we can't be honest with each other, then we're not friends, okay? And that's what I've been saying anyways. This crowd of folk who call themselves Church of Christ, I'm a Church of Christ, you're not a Christian. You are a traditional partyist who doesn't have a brain, who doesn't know the Bible. God gave you good brains, you're not using it. But if we can't be honest with each other, then we're not friends. And it's not a personal attack on any of them. So, and I don't have a problem with him doing it. I don't think that he was thinking I was going to give it back to him. When I was at Getwell, I hadn't seen Keith Mosier in like 10 years. And so he's walking into the Getwell building, and I come over and I call him Mr. Mosier. I said, "How are you doing, Mr. Mosier?" And he looked at me, and he said, I don't really believe that he didn't recognize me. He goes, "Are you Micah or Caleb?" And I said, "I'm Caleb." And then he said, "Oh, you're the one who talked so bad about me on TV." And I said, "Well, is that what you heard?" And he said, "That's what I saw." What world are we living in where Keith Mosier hasn't talked about people from the pulpit? Give me a break. And I just carried on with him. Is that what you heard? "Well, that's what I saw." And I said, "Well, I quoted your stuff. I quoted 1992 Preacher Forum meeting." And then we just walk in. I mean, I knew that he had lost a lot of weight. I asked him, "Did he do it on purpose or was he sick?" He said, "I'm 84 years old. I need to lose weight." And it was intentional. Then we got inside, and I said something about the 92 Preacher Forum again. He started saying stuff about Rubel Shelley that wasn't true from the 1992 perspective, and I said that's not true. And then he said, "Quit talking to me. You make me so angry." I have no problem being cordial. We're disagreeing without being disagreeable. But y'all, your frustration begins where your knowledge ends. And that's what we're seeing. And what we are seeing too is just a division on how people think. We want to make headway, and a lot of people want to keep status quo. And I would say that includes GBN wants to keep status quo. And if they didn't want to keep status quo, they'd be much more controversial than they are. But they have to keep status quo because, like Dad said, I make a video that makes a bunch of people from GBN upset, and we're not going to lose any support over it. But GBN can't say anything about Jeff Jenkins fellowshipping Orpheus Hayward because then they would possibly lose support. And they can't say anything about Phil Sanders because a lot of people who support In Search of the Lord's Way also support GBN, like where Brant Stubblefield was in Oklahoma supporting Phil Sanders. We're calling the stuff out. GBN's not. And so Daniel was preferred above all the presidents and princes because he had an excellent spirit, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king sought to set him over the whole realm. Then the king, verse 14, the king of the heart was set towards Daniel. I don't limit that to the idea that God was helping him with the visions and the dreams. I think that Daniel was a good person who was enjoyable to be around and was pleasant to be around. And so, let me have another moment too. Some people get around me and Dad, and I don't know what they're thinking, but it's like they want to challenge us, and I'm not interested in that. But it's like, how conservative do you think you are? I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't take very long for you to say, "You're not nearly as conservative as I thought you were." I'm surprised you even think I care what you think. But anyways, I think he had an excellent spirit, meaning that he was enjoyable to be around. He was pleasant to be around. The same thing, I did a lesson not too long ago about Jesus. Jesus had to be pleasant to be around. Okay, people weren't just fawning over him because of knowledge and the corrections and the whatnot. I mean, he had to be a thoughtful person who was pleasant. But as we say that doesn't take away from the book. Jesus is a controversialist. You trying to pigeonhole anybody, like if they're controversial, they have conviction, they have principles, you say, "Well, they're not a nice person." What do you think nice is? Daniel, you are a man greatly beloved. Yes, I think the law of Moses does that. The law of Moses, if we will follow the law, and I'm not talking, can you believe this dude in here promoting the Sabbath day? Well, you're ignorant if you just think that that's all the law of Moses has to offer is the Sabbath day. If I go in and I get the principles and the character from the law of Moses, then I will be a person of favor. I will be a person who is loved. I will have an excellent spirit, and I will be a beloved individual. God taught Israel how to be a good neighbor. Sure, the Sabbath day is in there, but as I said, if you think that's all it is, then you're just ignorant. Now, this I think is the same thing of 1 Samuel 18, verse number 14. David behaved himself wisely. And I think that's what Daniel was doing. He was behaving himself wisely. And I say the book of Daniel is a model for anybody's sons. And what you ultimately want to get out of your boys is you want them to grow up and be wise. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of the mother. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, gathers in the summer, hard work ethic, and you are wise. He that sleepeth in the harvest is a son that causeth shame. Some of y'all just let your kids be lazy, and that's on you. A wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner hears not rebuke. There's a lot of sons growing up, and they got a daddy at home, but the daddy doesn't give out any instruction. What can the boy do? It's the daddy's fault. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish man despises his mother. When I was about maybe 13, I think it was about when I was 13, 14, I heard one man who had heard it from an older man. The man said, these folk told us, don't let your kids do anything that makes you dislike them. Now, they're not talking about children, offspring who have grown up and they disagree with their parents. They're talking about kids having fits, kids talking back, kids not listening. Don't let them do it. And Jordan Peterson said the same thing in his book, 12 Rules. He's, don't let your kids do anything that makes you dislike them. Because chances are, most people aren't going to like it about them either. My son, if your heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice. And then he says, hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. The idea is you're getting your kids ready to start making these moral decisions and guard their own character. Whoso keepeth the law is a wise son. Well, if they're going to keep the law, they got to be educated about the law. And a bunch of daddies never taught their kids about being content. They never taught their kids about lasciviousness. They never warned their kids about the strange women of Proverbs 7. They never warned them against alcohol. They never warned them against just on and on and on. How can these kids keep the law when their daddies never taught them anything? Now, as we start wrapping up, and I got to move, I think the timeline of Daniel is very important. And I'm talking about everything that we just said about you, your dad, you're the daddy, and your boys, and raising them up to be character, to be an intellectual activist, to know the law and to be wise. Daniel is so important. Look at this. Jeremiah prophesied in the times of Josiah. Daniel is in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. And Ezekiel is in Babylon in the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of Jehoiakim's captivity. So here's the timeline according to Kings. Kings and Chronicles is connected to every single one of your prophetic books. Kings and Chronicle is the hub, and the prophets are the spokes that come out from the hub. They all touch. Jeremiah is best connected to 2 Kings 22. Daniel is best connected to 2 Kings 24:1, and Ezekiel is best connected to 2 Kings 24:12. And so here's what it stands for. Daniel is actually in Babylon before Jeremiah gets there. Jeremiah started prophesying before Daniel did. But Daniel will get to Babylon before Jeremiah does. Because Jeremiah is going to be in Judah all the way up to King Zedekiah being conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel will be taken into Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar overthrows Jehoiakim. And Jehoiakim comes after Jehoiakim, and it won't be until Jehoiakim that Ezekiel goes into Babylon. So by the time that Ezekiel gets there, Daniel has already been there. And he's already doing work. By the time Jeremiah gets there, Daniel's already been there and he's already been doing work. So here's what you actually see in the timeline. Daniel very well could have known about Jeremiah, heard of Jeremiah, and known the message in his childhood. Daniel was in Babylon before Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and so this is what you get. Daniel is the bridge from Jeremiah to Habakkuk 2:4. What does that mean? Well, they're going to get over there and they're not going to have their temple, their altar, their sacrifices, their priests. But Habakkuk 2:4 says their faith will sustain them. The just shall live by faith. Daniel is over there in Babylon doing work that creates a peaceful atmosphere for these people to arrive. So what Daniel is accomplishing is Ezekiel and Jeremiah, when they arrive, they won't have priests, altar, and a temple. But what they also won't have to do is they won't be having to fool with Babylon's idols. One young man who was clearly raised up by good parents, one young man who was able to be taught, who was cunning and crafty and had knowledge, one young man becomes the bridge to an entire nation's peace upon arrival. And this is how it happened. In Daniel chapter 1, this is where I say a moment ago about he's likable, good spirit. Daniel is controversial, but he's not problematic. Okay, we said disagree without being disagreeable. In Daniel chapter 1, this is your first introduction to him. Now look at Daniel 1:5 really quickly. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, is putting Daniel and other Hebrews through a 3-year education process. So he recognizes these are very capable young men. He says, well, I want to for the next 3 years, I want them to be educated on Babylonian culture and the language. Okay. In the meantime of going through their 3-year window, I would say on the front end, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the princes and the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now, God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the princes of the eunuchs, and I would say that's character built by the law of Moses rather than like, what's your idea? God zapped into some Babylonian's brain, love Daniel. He's a good guy, love Daniel. No. His character, formed by the law of Moses, created tender love and favor. And the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall he make me endanger my head to the king. So this man says, you're going to get me into trouble. This is clearly based on conviction, right? Leviticus 11. All he's saying is, I'm a Jew, and I can't eat that stuff. He knows the law before he goes into Babylon. Why else is he saying, no, I can't eat that stuff? Now, let me talk to you about, as we're going out, books. If you read Daniel 1 and he says, I can't eat that stuff, and then the text says they gave him pulse, and then you read Daniel 1 and go, oh, does God want me to be a vegetarian? Very, very poor Bible study. When you get into Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8, Paul is going to say, you eat meat. It's just not, you don't ask about the idol. Whatever's bought in the shambles, don't ask. Where did this meat come from? It's not about eating meat. There were certain things that Daniel could not eat, and that's just what it is. He can eat meat. He just can't eat certain meats. The Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying unto them, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, these are the beasts which you shall eat, nevertheless, these shall you not eat. And so apparently, Daniel's in a situation where he says, I can't eat that. Now, let me talk to you about books. I didn't read books until I was 17. And I just had a marker where my dad got stage 3 colon cancer, and I just said it's time to grow up. I read Prelude to Philosophy at a very young age. And I can remember in reading Prelude to Philosophy that he makes a note about Daniel 1, that he had a friend in college who said, I have to be a vegetarian now because Daniel was a vegetarian. And he's just talking about the way people think and hermeneutics and whatnot. Now, here's my point. Someone says, good for you, Caleb. You were able to read philosophy books at age 17 and 18. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that a load of your boys could do it. You just won't challenge them. Now, since we're talking about philosophy, years ago, in about, I would say, the 50s and the 60s, this has nothing to do with his religion, okay? Leroy Garrett taught in the Texas school systems. Leroy Garrett engineered a philosophy course for high school students, which had never been done, and he basically piloted it, and he came up with it. And so he taught them, and that's what his degree was philosophy. And so he told the Texas school system, let me teach these high schoolers an introduction to philosophy and just see what we find. And you know what Leroy found? The kids who were performing poorly in all their other classes excelled in their introduction to philosophy class in high school. And you know what Leroy said? He said their problem is it's not that they're not intelligent. He said their problem is that you guys are not challenging them enough. Challenge your boys to think. And if you're a daddy and you say, Caleb, I'm not disagreeing with you, but you say, I don't have the tools to give them what you're saying, well, then you need to start inching them towards a Christian man who can introduce them to those things. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're a daddy and you're just saying, look, I'm probably not going to be the one, I'm saying about you, don't sell yourself short. You can grow and you can help them too. But I'm saying if what you can do for your child is start getting them in the right way of thinking with the right style of people, and let me say this too, you getting your boys hooked up with fat preachers on the lectureship circuit and the whatnot, those guys are not good thinkers. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about teaching these young boys how to play the political game. I'm talking about thinking. And I have heard preachers just say, I gave a preacher a book, just a gesture of kindness, and he just said, I don't like to read books. Controversial? Yes. Problematic? No. Here's how I know he's not problematic. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And here's what they said. You guys want to change our names? Whatever. Just don't make us eat that unclean meat. I don't have to fight you on everything. Okay? What I have to do is I have to keep my conscience intact with God's Word. I do not care about sports teams. I don't care about automobiles. All this stuff that Christians bicker about, I don't care. Who makes a better car? I don't care. All this different stuff. There's a load of stuff that Christians are fighting about in the world, and they say, well, this stuff matters. Not heaven and hell matter. Hello? We're talking about souls. So these guys were controversial, but they're not problematic. Look, you want to change our names? Okay, what is it? Are these exact translations? Oh, your name's Daniel? That name would have been translated out to Belteshazzar. I don't know. Is your name Daniel? Well, we have a hard time saying Hananiah. How about we call you Shadrach instead? Yeah, what? They accepted it. They took it on themselves, but we're not eating unclean meat. Figure out what your real convictions are and stop being argumentative about stupid stuff. There's nothing wrong with learning culture either. They put them through this 3-year education process, and it says at the end of the day, bring them in. And what did he say? These guys are 10 times above what we got in Babylon. There's nothing wrong with learning culture. When my dad did mission work in the Pacific, what did they do? They adopted the culture to the best of their ability. Now, some things could possibly be so nuanced, you don't pick up on it. But he wasn't going into the Pacific to Americanize Marshallese people. And that's very, very much one thing that I do not like about American mission work is going over and acting like we have to turn these people into Americans before they can be Christians. What they need to do is they need to learn the Bible, and they will figure out Christian life according to the biblical principles inside their particular culture. They don't need Americanism. But this is what the boys did. They came in, they're young men. They are intelligent. They allowed their names to be changed. They said, just look, don't make us eat this unclean meat. Let me have a moment with you. Ian Young, in his job, has told, this was very good thinking on Ian's part. Ian sat down with his employers and he said, I can do a lot of stuff that you'd want me to do. And he said, basically what I'm wanting to protect in this job is, he said, Sunday morning I want to be in worship. And he said, here's what I mean by that. He said, I can work holidays that other people want off. Like he said, so if you want me working on Christmas, he said, Christmas is not important to me. It's not a religious holiday. He said, I can work. Just give me my Sunday. He said, Easter, he said, I'm not going to, like Easter, he said, I don't need any special stuff for Easter. He said, I just want to be in worship on Sunday. And you know what? The employers love Ian Young because he consistently works hard and he's not doing all this nonsense in the name of religion. Just give me my Sunday, and they love it. You want to change our names? Okay. You want us to learn your culture? Well, we're going to be living here for 70 years. Why not? Just don't make us eat that stuff. Paul said, though I be free from all men, I have made myself servant unto all that I might gain the more. I am made all things to all men that I might by all means save some. Paul was a man of culture, and he adopted their culture and he adapted to their culture, so long as he was not breaking God's laws. He wasn't going anywhere trying to make somebody about like, I'm from no mean city and I'm a Jew. I can blend into what you guys are doing, just so long as you don't have me doing X, Y, Z. Here we go, timeline. We're running out of time. Daniel probably heard Jeremiah. He was in Babylon before Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and he is the bridge from Jeremiah to Habakkuk 2:4. And so here's where you start looking at it also. The bridge, a young man, Daniel's a young man. When you're reading the book of Daniel, you're not just reading Joshua part 2, Samuel part 2, David part 2, young men, you're reading Joseph part 2. Daniel comes in and Nebuchadnezzar says, I've got this dream and I want it interpreted. So, Daniel comes in and he says, of a truth it is that you're, and this is what Nebuchadnezzar says. Daniel tells him what the dream was and he interprets the dream, and Nebuchadnezzar says, your God is God of all gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets. And then Nebuchadnezzar made Daniel ruler of the whole province of Babylon. Well, we're just rereading the story of Joseph now. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and he said, I want this dream to be interpreted. Joseph said, God has showed thee all of this. There is no secret. There's no discreet, none so discreet and wise as thou art. That's what Pharaoh said to Joseph. And Joseph told him, God will give the answer. God has shown it to Joseph. That's what Pharaoh said. And then Pharaoh promoted Joseph above the whole house. Look, that's Daniel. And what was Joseph? Joseph was an enslaved former convict who became the bridge of Israel to Egypt. The famine comes around and his brothers show up, and what does Joseph do? I'm your bridge. Came to pass at the end of 2 full years, he interprets the dream, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Joseph does God's bidding. God then through Joseph creates an atmosphere for these people to come in and be rescued. Daniel does the exact same thing. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon the Lord the king. And you know what? I believe that when they actually, Jeremiah 39, Nebuchadnezzar is full on taking the entirety of Judah away from Zedekiah, and what is said. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, gave charge concerning Jeremiah to his captain, saying, take him and look well to him and do him no harm, but unto him, even as do unto him as he shall say. Daniel is highly promoted in Babylon. He could have very well grown up knowing who Jeremiah was. And do you think that behind the scenes he doesn't say to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar starts making all these decrees about Jehovah God of Israel, and Daniel doesn't mention the name Jeremiah? So when the invasion happens and then all of a sudden a king comes out, you take a prophet who is he's accustomed to being beat down by his own people, and the foreigners show up and say, what do you want us to do for you? Daniel would have accomplished that. Verse number 40, the captain says, look, you can go with me to Babylon and we'll treat you well. You can stay here in Judah. What do you want to do? And Jeremiah says, let me stay with these poor folk and suffer a little while more. Daniel goes in as a young man and he creates the atmosphere where the rest of the Jews get to come in and have peace. Why? Because he has performed 10 times above what a Babylonian soothsayer could do. Now, live with imagination. Did Daniel's parents have a clue that their son would grow up and be a bridge between Judah and Babylon and create all these good feelings in Nebuchadnezzar? No. Then why don't you as an American start living like your child could be the greatest personal worker that ever lived or the greatest elder a congregation ever saw? Ego. Oh, shut up. This is for the people. No one's talking about having your name written down in history. We're talking about Daniel was a servant to the people while he was in captivity. Teach your boys to serve folk. Tell them this is widow work. That's what my dad told us. He said 2 things that God loves to see: helping the widows and the fatherless. And then he would say, what we're doing is widow work. Live with imagination. There's more than your son growing up and being on a lectureship circuit. The lectureships are dying. good. Us few. Nobody knew, and the preaching wasn't good in a long time anyway. Maybe your child won't be Daniel. Could your child be one of Daniel's friends? You gotta have friends. Elijah had one friend. Elijah had Elisha. And I can't think of the man's name who was hiding prophets in a cave. Obadiah was hiding prophets in a cave. He's a friend to Elijah. Daniel 2:17, before he went in to interpret the dream, he goes to his friends and he says to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that we would desire the mercies of God of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Raise your boys to help the men who are out there taking the stand. Raise your boys to do what's right when it costs them. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they communed with the king, and they were viewed as 10 times better, just like Daniel was. And in Daniel 3, the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the provinces of Babylon. It's not a competition. We're not out here trying to be Daniel. We all want to do the best that we can so that we can work together for what? The benefit of Babylon, of all people. What are you going to teach your kids? Huh? Can they throw a change-up? Can they throw a spiral? I don't know what they do in soccer. Do they hit the golf ball with the draw? What are you going to teach your kids? Hurlbut story of the Bible. He loves forever. Most Christians don't even like God. God loves them and they don't even like Him in return. What are you going to teach your kids? The friends that you pick matter. Be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. Acts 15:25 and 26. Barnabas and Paul, they have hazarded their lives for the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. You know what they got? They got shared trauma with each other. Get you some friends that will go through shared trauma for the kingdom's sake rather than leaving you high and dry when the politics tells them to. Daniel without friends wasn't going to make it. Moses had Aaron, Joshua had Caleb, David had Jonathan, Elijah had Elisha. Now here's the point. You lift up the hands that hang down and you help the feeble knees. These people were friends because they were dedicated to God first, and it created the friendship. They weren't friends and then they're like, oh, hey, we happen to like God together. No, we are servants of the Lord, and that binds us. And that's where I say earlier, most of these people, they don't know how to be friends because they won't let you be honest. That's because they're not bound to God and then bound to other servants. They are just traditionalists. What are you going to give to your kids? Give them Daniel's education. Exodus 23, 1 through 3. This is what Daniel got. This is what I'm going to give my kids. Don't lie. Don't raise a false report. Put not thy hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Neither shall you speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment. Neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. Tell the truth, stand up for the truth, and don't be a respecter of persons. Don't follow the crowd. That's what Daniel's being told. Don't follow the crowd. Be a man of action. Have conviction. Live with integrity. It's Proverbs 14:10. The heart knows his own bitterness. Y'all, we need this. Indoctrinate your children against bitterness. I have to watch myself. My parents didn't do this in front of me. I did not grow up where my parents talked trash about the church. And what we got is a bunch of preachers out here. And here's my thing, y'all. I'm working very hard for these young guys who are acting as a located preacher and they're not doing evangelism. I am working very hard for them to protect them against this 2-year cycle where they get fired and they moved. And they're fighting me on it even while I'm trying to help them. You guys, if you, number one, I can only help you so much. You got to help yourself. If you keep letting these ungodly elders abuse you and then you go home and talk trash in front of your kids, then excuse your kids for growing up and thinking the church stinks. Preachers who talk trash about the church in front of their kids create defectors. The heart knows his own bitterness, and a stranger does not intermeddle with his joy. Say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and He shall save thee. Look, tell your kids you get nothing out of being bitter. If you got problems, start looking for solutions. And you know what? These people who are hurting you, the people who are bringing you down, try to do good things to them for them, because you're not going to get anything out of vengeance. And promote resiliency. A just man falls 7 times and he raises up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief. Then said his wife, Job's wife said, curse God and die. Teach your kids that life is difficult and that it will be more difficult if you're not a Christian, which is 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. That's all in the book of Daniel in the first 6 chapters. And if all you guys think about is eschatology, you're wasting the book of Daniel. We'll have more Daniel next week at the appropriate time and more What Does the Bible Say at their appropriate times. 276-806-3641. My email address is calebgrobertson@gmail.com. We love you. Some of y'all just don't know how to be friends. But we love you. And God loves you. And we're all out here trying to act with integrity. Keep asking, what does the Bible say? God bless you. Have a good rest of your day.